basically, there are three that it can be summarized in, and I just want to read these comments to you quickly. So, for example, Sister Queen, again, we're not talking about specific parties, but hypothetically, if there was a party that had seemingly Muslim values of valuing the sanctity of life, certain feelings around, opinions on morality, on sexual ethics and morality, as well as even security. Does that not sound like the party of Islam? The other two arguments were, Sister Rosie says that essentially that there's a lot at stake, and what Trump proposes is very serious, and it's perhaps even more serious than what we've seen with genocide. And so would love to get you to weigh in on that. And then finally, there are a lot of people with this opinion, but just sharing one, Sister Cade said, there are other options out there. And again, I have to say, Celebrate Mercy doesn't endorse a specific platform or party. And that if Imam Tom did a 2-hour interview where he did talk about his personal opinion, you could find that on The Thinking Muslim, but would love Imam Tom to kind of weigh in on how we navigate just your take on these three opinions in the community.
Very good. Yeah, and I appreciate all the passionate discussion, Italian Americans, so we appreciate passion. That I think that the comment that I just made about the difference between policy and process is brought into even more importance in light of the comments, because the temptation is to see a party that has some of the policies that you like the most and to think, that's my party, I'm going with that, I'm hitching my wagon to that one. Which I'm not saying that that's wrong, or I'm not saying it's haram, I'm not saying anything super intense or prescriptive about that. But I'm saying that that is very surface level when it comes to political influence and long-term strategic planning. Why do I say that? Because over the past 30 to 40 years, the two major parties have actually gotten much, much closer to each other. And both of them have gone certain ways that this is called the Overton window. You're probably familiar with this term. The Overton window is basically refers to the scope of the debate. So if you see one of these debates that they have for the presidential election or any other election, there's certain questions that are asked, certain topics that are curated and chosen, and then there are things that are outside of that are not chosen, that are not spoken about. It's very, very possible, and to be frank, it's actually quite common that the things that matter the most to actual everyday people are actually outside of that window, not brought into the debate. However, what they will do is they will get you all, passionate about these very carefully selected questions that are talked about in a very bombastic and provocative way, inviting you to come in and now have your reaction on this issue that they have picked off the shelf and placed in front of you. That is a disempowering act. You think that you're being empowered by, well, I had my vote and I'm going to put it here because he or she said about this or that. And I'm not saying there's no power in it, but there's very, very little power compared to thinking about how do we affect what gets talked about and what doesn't get talked about. How do we think about how can we push both parties in a more, right now, both parties are Zionist. How do we
in their Zionism?
Yeah, like they compete, exactly. Like we have seen both candidates competing on who loves Israel more and who's going to support Israel. But how can we construct or concoct a 10-year plan so that in 10 years from now, both major parties are competing for which one supports Palestine? It can happen. It can actually happen. But you have to extract yourself out of the theater of politics, which is largely about containment and largely about domesticating and largely about sort of control. And you have to start to pay attention to how do these decisions get made in the first place, which is why I did peep a comment, another comment that was asking about, isn't the way to build power to basically work our way up the ranks within a particular party, and then we'll have enough leverage or relationships or whatever it is that we will affect change? Actually, no, that's not the way it happens at all. And in fact, it almost has never happened that way. In fact, when the most analogous situation that we could tie our current moment to was the last time, and I'm not endorsing anybody, but just to describe history, the last time a third party inserted itself into the American political sphere, which was the party of Lincoln, the Republican Party in the Civil War. That was the third party. Before Lincoln and the Republicans, it was the Democrats versus the Whigs. Both of them were pro-slavery. Both of them were pro-slavery. It took a third party to rise up on the platform because neither of those two parties were providing that option. It required people organizing something outside of those two parties in order to force the entire electoral situation to shift. The same thing happened. This was brought up recently. People were talking about the example of Ross Perot in the early 90s, the last sort of major third-party candidate to do well. He got almost 20% of the vote. This is a similar situation. He ran on one issue and one issue only, which was balancing the budget, and he got a lot of votes. And the very next election, his success forced the major parties to adopt his policy to try to take away his power base. And that's exactly what happened. You don't hear of this party anymore because that's what happened. So very, very rarely, listen, just as an example, look at what the Democratic Party did to Bernie Sanders. Look at what the Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the whole thing with superdelegates. And we've been through this. Look at even this year, with how they gave the nomination to Harris and didn't let it go to an open competitive nomination, which a lot of people wanted. They have many, many mechanisms to vet you. They have many, many mechanisms to weed you out. That the parties are constructed to do the thing that they're doing, and they're not really built for infiltration like that. That if you really want to change the landscape of politics, it's not an inside job. It's not about knowing the right people. If you talk local, perhaps you could make an argument for the local level, your city council, your school board, things like that. But once you get to state and federal, and you're talking about multi-million-dollar campaigns, and you're talking about a machinery, right? Like the Democratic Party and the Republican parties are machineries. They are very, very sophisticated operations. You're not going to really make a mark from just sort of relationships and moving on the inside and moving up the ranks. It usually takes an outside leverage that is going to force their hand to the negotiation table to change something. And all is best.